Claire, her old name, spoken the way it used to be, like a key sliding into a lock, cut through the orchestra's soft swell and the polite laughter of strangers. Claire didn't turn right away. She let the sound hang there, suspended over crystal and candlelight. She let it touch the back of her neck like cold rain. The ballroom inside the Metropolitan Museum's event wing, marble floors, towering columns, white lilies arranged like small clouds, kept breathing unaware. Cameras flashed near the step and repeat. A waiter glided by with a tray of champagne flutes, the glass chiming faintly as if the night itself had a heartbeat. Claire's fingers tightened around her drink. She could feel the condensation on the stem, a slick chill that reminded her of another night, another glass, another promise. She finally turned. And there he was. Ethan Cross stood just beyond the nearest table, half-shadowed by a tall centerpiece of orchids. His tie was slightly crooked like he'd retied it with shaking hands. His hair looked the same, but the confidence that used to sit in his shoulders had drained away. Something in his face had hardened into fatigue. Behind him, Miranda Wexley and Tessa Wexley hovered like two women who'd walked into a room expecting applause and discovered silence instead. Miranda's smile appeared first, then froze as her eyes fell past Claire's navy silk dress, past the calm brightness in Claire's face to the man beside her. Julian Hartwell. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. He was the kind of presence that didn't push air out of the room but somehow rearranged it. Julian's hand rested lightly at the small of Claire's back, steady and warm as if he'd been there all her life. His wedding band caught the chandelier's light for a heartbeat white gold, simple, expensive, in the way that didn't beg to be noticed. Ethan's gaze dropped to Claire's hand, to the ring, to the way it sat on her finger like it belonged. And in that moment, Ethan forgot how to blink. Miranda's lips parted, searching for words that might rebuild her world in front of witnesses. Tessa's eyes widened, then narrowed as if she could negotiate reality if she stared hard enough. Julian looked from their faces to Claire's, and his voice came out calm, almost gentle. "Can I help you?" he asked. Ethan swallowed, his throat working. I was just... Julian didn't step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He simply angled his body a fraction closer to Claire, and the movement, small, protective, made the power dynamic visible to everyone within earshot. Then Julian said clearly in a tone that was neither boast nor threat, "That's my wife." The words landed like a gavel. Around them, conversation faltered. A nearby laugh died mid-breath. Even the orchestra's music seemed to dim, as if the room itself understood that something had shifted. Claire watched Ethan's face collapse into shock, something like regret trying to claw its way up through years of bad choices. And just as Ethan opened his mouth, just as Miranda's eyes flashed with a sudden frantic calculation, Claire realized something strange. She wasn't angry, not the way she once thought she'd be. She felt distance, like looking at a storm from behind thick glass. She took a slow breath. The air smelled of lilies and expensive perfume and old stone. And then, to understand why Ethan had said her name like a prayer he didn't deserve, we have to go back. Because this story didn't begin under chandeliers. It began under fluorescent lights in a small apartment in San Francisco, when love still felt like enough. San Francisco had a way of making people look upward, not just at the skyline or the hills or the glass towers that reflected the ocean's pale moods, but upward into their own ambitions. In that city, everyone was building something, a company, a reputation, a future they could point to and say, "I made that." Claire Ashford had been building something too. At first it was simple, a life with Ethan. They met the way modern love stories often begin, through proximity, through shared circles, through late-night conversations that accidentally became necessary. Ethan was the kind of man who could make a plan sound like destiny. He talked about the future like it owed him something. When he looked at Claire, he made her feel chosen. For 3 years, they were a rhythm. Saturday mornings were coffee from the little shop on Valencia Street, the one that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and burnt sugar. Sundays were long walks through Dolores Park, where they'd watch dogs sprint and children laugh, and Ethan would squeeze her hand and talk about one day. One day they'd have their own place. One day he'd stop hustling for gigs and finally land something stable. One day he'd be the man he knew he could be, and Claire would be there. She always would, because that's what love was. Right, Claire worked at a small marketing agency, then not glamorous, not high-paying, but honest. She came home tired and still cooked dinner because she liked the way Ethan's face softened when he tasted something warm and real. And Ethan tried. He wasn't lazy. That was the frustrating part. He was always moving, always chasing. He took meetings that led nowhere, pitched ideas to men who never returned, calls applied for roles he almost got but never quite. He wore confidence like a tailored suit, even when his bank account couldn't afford it. Claire believed in him. Not because she was naive, but because when Ethan spoke late at night, lying beside her in the dim light of a cheap lamp, his voice wasn't fake. It was hungry. It was scared. It was human. Sometimes she'd catch him staring at the ceiling after she'd fallen asleep. Sometimes he'd flinch when friends talked about promotions, bonuses, new cars. But he always came back to her. "Give me time," he'd say, pressing his forehead to hers. "I'm going to make it. For us." And Claire would nod because love made patience feel like loyalty. Then her father remarried. It happened in a way that felt abrupt, like a door closing. Claire's mother had been gone for years, a quiet grief that sat in the corners of their family home. When her father introduced Miranda, Wexley, charming, elegant, always dressed like she belonged in a magazine, Claire tried to be open-minded. Miranda smiled often, but it never reached her eyes. Miranda had a daughter too, Tessa Wexley, all glossy hair and curated laughter, the type of woman who never looked messy even when she was casual. She spoke like the world was a stage built for her. From the beginning, Miranda watched Claire the way someone watches an asset they haven't decided how to use. She asked questions. "Oh, Claire, sweetheart," Miranda said one afternoon at a family brunch swirling her mimosa. "Ethan, what does he do again?" "He's in business development," Claire replied, keeping her tone light. Miranda tilted her head. "Business development," she repeated slowly, as if tasting a word that didn't quite satisfy. "And is it going well?" Claire's cheeks warmed. "He's building his career." Miranda's smile widened. "Of course he is." Tessa laughed softly like it was all adorable. Claire wanted to defend Ethan. She wanted to say that ambition mattered, that character mattered, that love was not measured in LinkedIn titles. But she swallowed the words because she'd been raised to keep peace at the table. Miranda, however, was not raised that way. Miranda lived for control. And soon she began to weave herself into Ethan's world like a silk thread, soft enough to go unnoticed, strong enough to tighten. It started small, a dinner invitation, a compliment, a conversation that felt helpful. "You know," Miranda told Ethan once when Claire stepped into the kitchen to refill drinks, "talent is lovely, but connections are everything. The right marriage can change a man's life." When Claire returned, Miranda was smiling like she'd said something harmless. Ethan's eyes looked distant. Claire noticed, but she didn't understand yet. Because some manipulations don't arrive like lightning. They arrive like fog, quiet, slow, convincing you the world has always been blurry. The night Ethan left, rain was dragging itself down the apartment windows, like it couldn't decide whether to fall or cling. Claire remembered that detail years later, not because the weather mattered, but because it matched what she felt: suspended, uncertain, bracing for impact. She had made pasta, the cheap kind, because payday was still a week away. She'd lit a candle on the table because she wanted the night to feel softer than their bank account. Ethan came in late. He didn't kiss her the way he usually did. He didn't make a joke about how good the apartment smelled. He didn't loosen his tie with relief. He stood near the door, water dripping from his coat, and stared at the floor like the floor might tell him what to do. Claire's chest tightened. "Ethan." He looked up, and his eyes, usually bright with plans, were strangely blank, like someone had reached into his mind and turned the volume down on his conscience. "We need to talk," he said. "Those words. Always those words." Claire swallowed. "Okay." He moved to the table but didn't sit. He hovered, hands flexing at his sides. "I've been thinking," he began, then stopped as if the sentence hurt. Claire leaned forward. "About what?" He exhaled hard. "About us. About the future." The candle flame trembled. Claire forced a small smile. "We always think about the future." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yeah, and that's the problem." Her smile faded. "What do you mean?" He looked away toward the rain-smeared window. "I can't keep doing this, Claire." "Doing what?" Her voice rose. Trying, building, living, Ethan finally met her gaze. And in that moment she saw something that chilled her more than the rain. Guilt. Not the kind that made you stop doing something wrong, but the kind that made you want to justify it. I want more, he said. And I'm stuck. Claire stared at him. We're not stuck. We are, he snapped, then softened immediately. I'm sorry. I can't breathe in this life anymore. Claire's hands went cold. What life? Our life, Ethan swallowed. I'm trying to become someone, and I need to make the right moves. Claire's eyes searched his face. What right moves? He hesitated. Then, like ripping a bandage, he said it. I'm going to marry Tessa. The words hit like blunt force. For a second, Claire couldn't process them. Her brain refused to attach meaning like it was a foreign language. Tessa, she whispered. Ethan flinched. It's not what you think. Claire let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. How could it be anything else? He stepped closer. Claire, listen. Miranda, she showed me things. Introduced me to people. I've been to rooms I didn't even know existed. The kind of rooms where deals happen, where careers are made. Claire's throat tightened. So you're leaving me? For a room, Ethan's eyes flashed with frustration. You don't get it. I don't get it. Her voice shook now. I loved you for 3 years. I believed in you when you had nothing. I know, Ethan interrupted and his voice cracked. I know, but love isn't enough. Silence filled the space between them. Even the rain seemed to pause like it wanted to hear the next line. Claire stood slowly. Her chair scraped against the floor loud in the small apartment. You're saying, she said carefully, that my love isn't enough. That's not what it is. Claire's eyes burned. Because if it was enough, you wouldn't need someone else's last name to feel like a man. Ethan's face hardened. It's not about being a man. It's about winning. Claire stared at him. Winning. As if life were a game and she was a piece he could sacrifice. You're choosing her because you think she's a shortcut, Claire said. A ladder. Ethan looked away. I'm choosing a future. Claire's laugh broke out sharp and bitter. Then I hope it keeps you warm at night. Ethan's lips parted like he wanted to say something soft, something redeeming, but he didn't. Because in that moment he wasn't brave enough to be cruel with honesty. He was only brave enough to be cruel with excuses. When he left, Claire didn't chase him. Not because she didn't want to, but because something inside her, something proud, something wounded, refused to beg for a man who had already priced her out of his life. The door closed, the candle flickered, and Claire sank to the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, breathing shallowly like the air had turned thin. She didn't cry at first. She just stared at the rain. And somewhere in the back of her mind a thought formed, not loud, not dramatic, but steady. If love wasn't enough for him, then I would become enough for myself. That was the night her old life ended, and the quiet rebuilding began. The first weeks after Ethan left were ugly in the way real heartbreak is. Not cinematic, not poetic. Ugly like waking up and reaching for someone who wasn't there. Ugly like still buying 2 coffees by accident. Ugly like hearing a song in a grocery store aisle and having to grip the cart to stop yourself from falling apart in front of strangers. Claire went to work, smiled when she had, stared at her screen when she couldn't focus. Her friends asked if she was okay, and she said yes because no would require explanations she didn't have the energy to give. Miranda called once. Her voice was honey-sweet, almost pitying. Claire, darling, Miranda said, I heard about Ethan. How unfortunate. But these things happen. Men have to do what's best for their future. Claire's knuckles went white around the phone. You mean what's best for your future, she replied quietly. Miranda laughed softly. Oh, sweetheart, don't be dramatic. There's no need for bitterness. Claire swallowed the urge to scream. Instead, she ended the call. And that was the first time she chose herself over the need to be polite. Claire didn't transform overnight. She didn't wake up with perfect hair and a revenge dress and a dramatic soundtrack. She woke up exhausted, and then she did one small thing. She signed up for an online course in business fundamentals. It felt almost laughable, like putting a bandage on a broken bone. But it was something. It was movement. When the course ended, she enrolled in marketing strategy. Then data analytics. Then a leadership workshop that scared her because it made her speak up. She studied in the evenings, laptop balanced on her knees, the glow of the screen, washing her face in pale light while the city outside buzzed with other people's lives. Sometimes she cried while watching lectures. Sometimes she wanted to quit, but she kept going. Because she had a new reason now not to prove Ethan wrong, not to punish Miranda, but to reclaim the version of herself that had been folded into someone else's dreams. A friend from work told her about a tech startup looking for someone in growth marketing. They're chaotic, her friend warned. Long hours. Everyone does everything. Claire heard opportunity. She applied. Her hands trembled during the interview, but her voice stayed steady. She talked about what she'd learned. She talked about what she'd built. When they offered her the job, the salary wasn't huge, but it was more than she'd ever made. That night, she bought herself takeout and ate alone at her table, candle lit not for romance, but for ceremony. For the first time since Ethan left, she felt something like pride. Meanwhile, Ethan and Tessa's life glittered on social media. At first, engagement photos in expensive clothes, a venue tour at a vineyard, Miranda smiling in the background like she'd just won a trophy. People commented heart emojis and power couple jokes. Claire watched none of it. Not because she didn't know it existed, but because she learned quickly that pain fed on attention. Still, news traveled. A mutual friend mentioned casually, "Did you hear Ethan and Tessa are moving into a place in Nob Hill?" Claire smiled politely and changed the subject. Another friend said Miranda keeps talking about how Ethan's destined for big things. Claire nodded as if destiny were something you could purchase with a wedding. Then the cracks began to show. Because you can't build a marriage on strategy without eventually running out of moves. Ethan's career didn't explode. It stumbled forward like a car that wouldn't start properly. Miranda made introductions, but introductions weren't jobs. Tessa's social circle liked parties, not responsibility. People smiled at Ethan, shook his hand, promised to circle back, and never did. Tessa spent anyway. Designer bags, weekend trips, champagne brunches, a lifestyle that looked rich from a distance but sounded like debt when you listened closely. Ethan tried to keep up because that's what he'd married into appearance. At night, he stared at the ceiling again. Only this time, Claire wasn't there to soften his fears. Tessa would roll over, irritated. "Why are you awake, I'm thinking," Ethan would say. About what Tessa would snap. "You're always thinking. Thinking doesn't pay for anything." And Miranda. Miranda watched the dream wobble and tightened her grip. She blamed Ethan when the connections didn't turn into contracts. She blamed Tessa when the bills piled up. She blamed the world as if the world had broken its promise to reward her manipulation. But deep down, Miranda began to understand something she hated. Claire had been the steady one, the one who built instead of posed, and Miranda had thrown her away. Claire's startup life was brutal. She learned to drink coffee like medicine. She learned to answer emails with calm, even when her chest was tight. She learned to pitch campaigns to skeptical founders who measured everything in numbers. Some days, she felt invisible. Other days, she felt unstoppable. Her first big win came on a Tuesday. A campaign she designed simple, clear, honest, tripled sign-ups for a product launch. The CEO, a tired man in a hoodie, looked at her with surprise. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. Claire blinked. I studied." He nodded slowly. "Well, keep studying." It wasn't a compliment wrapped in poetry, but it was recognition. And Claire held on to it like a rung on a ladder. Months turned into years. Claire rose. Not because the world suddenly became fair, but because she kept showing up. She moved into a better apartment, still modest, but hers. She bought herself a coat that actually kept her warm. She stopped flinching at the sound of her own name. And one evening at a networking event she almost didn't attend, she met a man who didn't look like a savior. He looked like calm. Julian Hartwell stood near the back of the room, listening more than talking. He wore a dark suit that didn't shout, and his eyes were attentive in a way that made people feel seen. When Claire spoke during a panel, Q&A, asking a sharp, thoughtful question about sustainable growth, Julian's gaze flicked to her interested. Afterward, he approached. "You asked the question everyone was afraid to ask," he said. Claire laughed lightly. "I didn't realize they were afraid." Julian's mouth curved. "They were. You weren't." Claire studied him. "And you? Were you afraid?" Julian's eyes warmed. "Of what?" "Of standing out." He paused, then smiled. "I learned a long time ago that standing out isn't dangerous if you're standing in the truth." Claire didn't know then that Julian Hartwell was the kind of investor people whispered about in founder circles, the kind who could make one call and move markets. He didn't wear it like a crown. He wore it like responsibility. He asked Claire about her work, not her family, not her relationship status, not her connections, her work. And that in a city obsessed with image felt like something rare. Claire and Julian didn't fall into love the way movies pretend people do. There was no dramatic kiss in the rain. There was no grand confession on a rooftop. It was quieter, and because it was quiet, it was real. Their first dates were simple dinner in a small restaurant where the lighting was warm and the menu didn't need translation. Walks along the Embarcadero where the air smelled like salt and possibility. Conversations that didn't feel like interviews. Julian never tried to impress Claire with what he had. He impressed her with what he noticed. He noticed when she got tired and tried to hide it. He noticed when she spoke about work with fire in her voice. He noticed how she held her coffee cup with both hands when she was thinking hard. One night, months in, Claire admitted something she'd never said aloud. "I used to think love had to be a sacrifice," she said quietly, staring at the water. "Like, if I loved someone, I should make my world smaller so theirs could grow." Julian turned toward her fully. "Who taught you that?" Claire hesitated. She could have said Ethan. She could have said Miranda. She could have said the years of being easy so others could be comfortable. But instead, she said, "I don't know. Life, maybe." Julian's voice was soft. "Love shouldn't make you smaller, Claire. It should make you safer to be big." Claire's throat tightened. No man had ever said that to her. Not like a compliment. Like a promise. When Julian finally told her who he was, not in a press release way, but honestly, Claire didn't gasp. She didn't suddenly treat him differently. She asked one question. "Do you like your life?" she asked. Julian's expression turned thoughtful. Some parts. Some parts are lonely." Claire nodded. "Then let's make it less lonely." They didn't rush marriage. They built trust first. Julian met Claire's friends. Claire learned Julian's routines, the way he checked in on companies he'd invested in, the way he quietly donated to causes without putting his name on banners. When Claire met Julian's world, the dinners, the boardrooms, the people who smiled too much, Julian stayed close, not controlling but anchoring. He never treated her like someone he was upgrading. He treated her like someone he chose. When he proposed, it wasn't in a crowd. It was in their apartment on a night when it rained softly against the windows, the same sound that used to mean heartbreak now transformed into something gentle. Julian knelt, held out a ring that was elegant and simple, and said, "I don't want a life that I have to win. I want a life we build." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered. They married quietly. Not secretively, just without spectacle. Claire wore a dress that made her feel like herself. Julian wore a suit and the expression of a man who understood he'd been given something priceless. After the wedding, Claire kept working. Julian didn't ask her to stop. He asked her what she wanted next. She told him, "I want peace." Julian smiled. "Then we protect it." Months later, a formal invitation arrived, thick paper embossed lettering. The Hartwell Foundation Gala, New York City. A charity event hosted in partnership with major cultural institutions, attended by donors and executives, and people who treated generosity like a performance. Claire held the invitation heart steady. She didn't fear rooms like that anymore. Because she wasn't entering as a girl desperate to be accepted. She was entering as a woman who knew her worth without their permission. Julian read the invitation over her shoulder. "Do you want to go?" he asked. Claire thought for a moment. She pictured Miranda's world, her glassy smiles, her subtle digs, her belief that status was a weapon. Claire pictured Ethan's face the night he left. Then she looked at Julian and realized the truth. She wasn't going to that gala for revenge. She was going because it was part of her life now, a life she'd earned. "Yeah," Claire said, calm. "Let's go." New York in winter had sharp edges. The wind sliced between buildings like it was angry at the sky. The streets glittered with lights and wet asphalt. Taxi horns echoed like restless birds. Inside the gala venue, everything was warm. Candles, champagne, golden light, spilling over marble floors. Claire stepped out of the car beside Julian, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. For a moment she paused, breathing in the cold air, and felt the weight of where she'd been and where she was now. Julian offered his arm. Claire took it. They entered. A photographer called Julian's name, not loudly but with recognition. A few heads turned. Conversations shifted. People made room. Claire's spine stayed straight. A woman approached, beaming. "Julian, thank you for coming. We're honored." Julian smiled politely. "Of course. This matters. And this must be—" The woman's eyes landed on Claire. "My wife," Julian said. Claire offered her hand. "Claire Hartwell." The woman's eyes widened slightly at the last name, then she recovered with a bright smile. "It's wonderful to meet you." Claire smiled back, poised. She felt Julian's hand brush her back again, a quiet reassurance. A signal. "We're okay." They moved deeper into the ballroom. The orchestra played. Waiters floated. The air shimmered with wealth in the way it always did at events like this, not just in clothes, but in confidence. Claire was listening to Julian speak with a museum director when she felt it. A shift, like the temperature changing, like rain coming. Claire turned her head slightly, and across the room Miranda Wexley stood near a high cocktail table dressed in a sleek black gown, pearls gleaming like teeth. She looked older than Claire remembered, but she was still composed, still calculating. Beside her, Tessa Wexley wore a red dress that screamed for attention. Her smile was bright, but her eyes darted around like she was hunting for someone richer. And Ethan Cross. Ethan looked like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long. His suit was fine. His posture tried to be confident. But his face told the truth. The hollowness under the eyes, the tension around the mouth, the subtle way. His gaze scanned the room like a man searching for rescue. Claire's heart didn't race. It didn't twist. It simply acknowledged them. Julian noticed her stillness. "You okay?" he murmured. Claire nodded. "Yeah." She didn't tell him who they were yet, because she didn't need to. Miranda saw Claire first. At first, Miranda's expression was polite disinterest, the way wealthy women look at strangers who aren't relevant. Then recognition struck. Miranda's eyes sharpened. Her smile faltered. Her gaze dropped to Claire's hand, to the ring, then rose slowly to Julian. Miranda's face went pale. Tessa followed Miranda's line of sight, and her lips parted. Ethan's gaze landed on Claire. For a moment he didn't move. It was as if time stuttered. Then he took one step forward, drawn by a force he hadn't expected, like guilt had become gravity. Claire watched him approach, and in her mind she saw the apartment, the candle, the rain, the words, "Love isn't enough." Now, under chandeliers, she wondered if Ethan finally understood what it cost to treat love like currency. Ethan stopped a few feet away. His eyes clung to Claire's face, scanning for anger, for hurt, for anything that would let him feel important again. "Claire," he said softly. Claire's expression remained composed. "Ethan." He flinched at how neutral her voice was, like his name was just a word, not a wound. Tessa arrived behind him, trying to smile. "Wow," she said, voice too bright. "Look at you. You look amazing." Claire nodded politely. "Thank you." Miranda stepped forward, regaining control by force of will. Claire Miranda said, her tone dripping with artificial warmth. "What a surprise. I had no idea you'd be here." Claire held Miranda's gaze. "I'm here with my husband." Miranda's eyes flicked to Julian, then back to Claire. "Your husband," she repeated. Ethan swallowed. "You're married," he said, voice hoarse. Claire blinked slowly. "Yes." Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. He looked down again at her ring like it was accusing him. Tessa's smile tightened. "And who is your husband?" she asked, as if the answer might save her from humiliation. Julian, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. His voice was calm, Julian Hartwell. Miranda's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she masked it. But the flicker was enough, because Miranda knew that name. Everyone in certain circles did. Julian Hartwell wasn't loud on social media, but his influence traveled in whispers and signatures. He was the kind of man whose presence in a room meant money had already moved before anyone saw it. Ethan's face drained of color. "Julian Hartwell," he repeated, barely audible. Julian held his gaze steady, not hostile. "Yes." Ethan's throat bobbed. I didn't realize." Claire almost smiled, not because she enjoyed his discomfort, but because the irony was so sharp it could cut glass. Ethan had traded love for connections, and now the most powerful connection in the room stood beside the woman he'd abandoned. Miranda's smile returned, strained. "Well," she said quickly, "isn't that wonderful? Claire always had potential." Claire's eyes remained on Miranda. Potential isn't something you give someone, Miranda. Miranda's eyes flashed. Excuse me. Claire's voice was still gentle. It's something they build. A nearby couple slowed their conversation, ears subtly tuned. The room was listening now, like an audience pretending not to be. Tessa's cheeks reddened. Claire, come on, she said, forcing a laugh. We're family. Claire tilted her head. We were never family. That landed. Miranda stiffened. Ethan looked pained. Julian's hand remained at Claire's back, a silent shield. Ethan stepped forward, voice cracking with something that sounded like desperation. Claire, can we talk? Just for a second. Alone. Claire studied him. She saw the man she used to love, the man who used to whisper one day like it was a vow. But she also saw the man who had looked at her and said, love isn't enough. She didn't feel rage. She felt clarity. No, Claire said. Ethan blinked. No, Claire's voice softened but didn't bend. There's nothing to talk about. Ethan's face tightened. I made a mistake. Miranda snapped Ethan, but Ethan ignored. Her eyes locked on Claire. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought it would lead to what Claire asked quietly. Ethan swallowed. To success. Claire nodded slowly. And did it? Ethan's silence was answer enough. Tessa's eyes flicked away, jaw clenched. Miranda's mouth tightened like she'd bitten something sour. Claire exhaled a steady breath. I hope you find what you're looking for, Ethan, she said, but you're not looking for it in my life anymore. Ethan's eyes glistened. You look happy. Claire glanced at Julian, at the calm in his face, the warmth in his eyes, the steadiness that never demanded she shrink. Then she looked back at Ethan. I am, Claire said. And for the first time she realized those two words were the most powerful revenge she could ever deliver. Because they weren't weapons, they were truth. Miranda scrambled, voice hurried, Claire, darling, perhaps we can. Claire lifted a hand slightly, not rude, just firm. Enjoy the gala, she said. Then she turned away. Not dramatically, not with a smirk, simply with the natural movement of someone walking out of a room that no longer belonged to her. As Claire and Julian moved toward the stage where a speaker was beginning a donation announcement, Claire heard Ethan inhale sharply behind her as if he'd been punched by the realization that she wasn't coming back. Julian leaned closer. Do you want to leave? He asked softly. Claire shook her head. No. Her voice was calm. This is my life, she said. I'm staying. And the orchestra kept playing, the chandeliers kept shining, and the past finally had to watch the present win without any cruelty at all. 2 days after the gala, Claire was back in San Francisco. The city welcomed her like it always did. Fog rolling in like a slow sigh, coffee shops buzzing, people walking fast like time mattered. Claire stood in her kitchen early in the morning, barefoot on cool tile making tea. Julian was behind her, reading emails on his phone, his tie loosened because he didn't wear perfect at home. The kettle whistled. Claire poured water over tea leaves and watched the steam rise, delicate and fleeting. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Claire stared at it for a beat, then answered. Hello. A familiar voice slid through the line like silk. Claire Miranda Wexley said. Claire's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. She didn't look at Julian yet. Miranda Claire replied evenly. There was a pause, the kind that meant Miranda was calculating the right tone. Then Miranda sighed softly, as if she were tired from carrying so much regret. I wanted to talk to you, Miranda said. After the gala. I've been thinking about everything. Claire's eyes remained on her tea. The steam curled like a quiet ghost. What about everything? Claire asked. Miranda's voice dipped into something almost tender. I think mistakes were made. I think I wasn't fair to you. Claire said nothing. Miranda continued quickly, sensing the distance. I'm calling because I miss you. We're family, Claire, and I hate that we've been apart. Claire almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable it hurt. Miranda didn't miss Claire. Miranda missed what Claire represented now. A door Miranda hadn't known she was slamming shut. Claire's voice stayed calm. Miranda, she said gently, why are you really calling Miranda? Inhaled, sharply offended by the directness. Excuse me, Claire spoke softly like she was talking to someone fragile. You didn't call when I was rebuilding. You didn't call when I was working nights. You didn't call when I was crying alone in my apartment. Miranda's voice sharpened. That's not fair. It is fair, Claire said. Because I remember. Silence. Claire heard faint background noise on Miranda's end. Perhaps a car, perhaps a room full of expensive quiet. Miranda's voice returned careful. Claire, you've done well for yourself, and I'm proud. Truly. Claire closed her eyes. Proud. Miranda, who had orchestrated her heartbreak like a business deal, now said proud, as if she'd contributed. Claire opened her eyes and looked at Julian. He wasn't listening closely, but he noticed her expression and set his phone down, his attention shifting to her without demand. Claire turned slightly away, focusing on the call. Miranda, Claire said, voice steady, I'm happy. I have a good life. I'm surrounded by people who don't treat love like leverage. Miranda's tone turned slightly desperate. Claire, please. You don't understand how difficult things have been. Tessa, her marriage, Ethan, Claire's heart didn't move. Not toward cruelty, not toward satisfaction, just stillness. I'm sorry things are difficult, Claire said honestly. But your difficulties aren't my responsibility. Miranda's breath caught. So, that's it. You're going to punish us. Claire shook her head, even though Miranda couldn't see it. I'm not punishing you, she said. I'm simply not available. That sentence landed like a door closing. Miranda's voice hardened. You're being cold. Claire's voice remained warm. I'm being clear. Another silence. And then Miranda tried one last angle, soft, pleading, almost maternal. Claire, she murmured, you were always such a good girl, such a forgiving girl. Claire's throat tightened. Because there it was, the old hook, the old control. Be good, be forgiving, be small enough for others to be comfortable. Claire's gaze flicked to the window where fog clung to the glass like memory. Then she spoke quietly, firmly. I'm still good, Claire said. I'm just not yours to use. Miranda didn't have a reply. Claire waited 1 second longer than she needed to, just long enough to prove she wasn't afraid of silence anymore. Then she said, take care, Miranda, and she ended the call. She set the phone down on the counter. Her hands were steady. Julian stepped closer without a word and touched her shoulder lightly. You okay? He asked. Claire nodded. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel cruel. She felt free. I thought I'd feel something bigger, Claire admitted softly. Julian's eyes held hers. You feel peace, he said. Claire let out a slow breath and her shoulders relaxed. Yes, she whispered. I do. Julian leaned in and kissed her forehead, gentle grounding. Later that week, Claire heard through an old friend that Ethan and Tessa were separating. Debt, arguments, blame. The kind of collapse that happened when a marriage was built on performance instead of partnership. Miranda's social circle had grown quieter, too, because high society loved glamour, but it loved winners more. And Miranda, who had always treated life like a marketplace, was learning that not everything could be bought back. Ethan, the man who'd once said love wasn't enough, was forced to face the empty echo of his own choice. Because success without peace was just noise. And Claire kept living. She went to work, led campaigns, mentored younger employees. She laughed more. She slept better. She stopped looking over her shoulder for the past. Some nights rain tapped at the windows and Claire would remember the night Ethan left. But now the sound didn't crush her. It reminded her, the same rain that drenched her heartbreak also watered her rebirth. One evening, Julian came home with takeout and a tired smile. He set the food down, loosened his tie, and said, Long day. Claire walked to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. Me too, she said. Julian exhaled against her hair. But we're okay. Claire closed her eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. We're more than okay, she whispered, because the best revenge wasn't a speech at a gala. It wasn't humiliation. It wasn't bitterness served cold. The best revenge was building a life so bright, so full of love and calm and self-respect that the people who once hurt you became background noise, and you didn't even need to turn around to hear them fading. If you've ever been left behind because someone thought you weren't enough, please remember this. Your worth was never something they could price. And one day when you're living a life that feels like peace, you'll realize the moment you stopped chasing them was the moment you finally found yourself.